לנו תורה, יש לנו תורה, יש לנו תורה מיוחדת במינה. בבתי הכנסת השמחה חוגגת, יש לנו תורה, יש לנו תורה, יש לנו תורה, יש לנו תורה, יש לנו תורה מיוחדת במינה. בבתי הכנסת השמחה חוגגת, יש לנו תורה, יש לנו תורה. יש גם חתונה, יש גם בר מצווה, יש לנו חגים וגם שושן פורים. יש פדיון הבן, יש גם ברית מילה, יש את חג הפסח וחג החנוכה. מה אגיד לכם ומה אספר, זה כבוד גדול לחיות עם ישראל. אנו מעטים והעסקים, התורה ניתנה לנו לעולמי עולמים. יש לנו תורה, יש לנו תורה, יש לנו תורה מיוחדת במינה. בבתי הכנסת השמחה חוגגת, יש לנו תורה, יש לנו תורה. יש לנו תורה, יש לנו תורה, יש לנו תורה מיוחדת במינה. בבתי הכנסת השמחה חוגגת, יש לנו תורה, יש לנו תורה. באה השבת, כמה היא יפה, הנה באה השבת, הנה המלכה. הנה באה השבת, הנה המלכה. לך דופי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לך דופי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. הנה באה השבת, כמה היא יפה, הנה באה השבת, הנה המלכה. הנה באה השבת, הנה המלכה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה.
Shabbat Shalom. We have more people there.
You have me.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
We have Joseph McGrath. Hey, those are nice headphones, Jeremy.
I like them.
Are they wireless?
Yes.
Wow. That's cool. I think we're waiting for the McGrath. I don't know if Judy's here. We only have we have 4 with Joseph and Rachel.
Yeah, only 4. We got 8 people watching online. There's Linda.
Okay, let's start. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome to Torah Talk. This is the disclaimer. Jeremy, can you read that?
Well,
With your voice is way better than mine.
Torah Talk is a time of open discussion for people to ask questions and discuss Torah-related topics. This discussion is being recorded and broadcast live to the public. Some topics may be sensitive, difficult, and/or inappropriate for young children. Participants are asked to please refrain from using language that is considered stereotypical, racist, or derogatory toward any person or people group. The opinions or thoughts expressed by the participants are not necessarily in agreement with those of Valley of Blessing Messianic Congregation.
Amen. Amen. Okay, I don't know if the people already have lunch there, but we're not gonna have a prayer for the meals. I don't know if they already have their lunch or not. But today's topic, what we're gonna study is: was the Last Supper a Passover meal? Somebody, I think, was Judy that proposed this topic last Shabbat. So we are going to be talking about this. Remember, if you have comments or questions or want to say something, just let us know through here, those who are participating here in the Zoom, or also those who have or be interacting with us through the chat on YouTube. Also, if you have further questions, don't hesitate to contact us through our web page, www.valleyofblessing.org, or you can visit us in our Facebook page and in our Facebook group, Emet Baraha. Just let us know who you are, and we can talk with you, and we can let you participate in that and as well, or through the chat here in YouTube. Okay, was the Last Supper a Passover meal? I have a disclaimer here, because for me the conclusion is, what's the point if that was a Passover Seder or not? I think that the most important thing is that the symbolisms Yeshua used on that dinner was fulfilled at that time. And that is that his blood and his flesh was given for us for our sins. For me, that's the whole point. So, being that said, and for the sake of this discussion, let's continue with our question. Okay, was the Last Supper a Passover meal? What do you think? It was. Linda says it was. Who else is there? We have
Travis is saying yes.
We have okay, I got it. Sometimes my cursor disappears. Travis and Amanda. Hey.
Okay, I think it was Passover as well.
Okay, Joanne is there. Is Joseph there? Okay, I think that the question comes from an apparently contradiction between the synoptic gospels and the Gospel of John. Which are the synoptic gospels? Who knows which are the synoptic gospels? We can answer that.
Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Okay, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and they are called synoptic gospels because from the Latin word which means seen together. Because those gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, tell many of the same stories, often in the same word and frequently following the same order. They share many things, as you can see right there in the screen. So you can put Matthew, Mark, and Luke in parallel columns next to each other, and you can compare their stories with one another, and can see then that they are telling the same story. There's some variations, but mostly it's the same story. So they are synoptics because you can see them together.
So the purple,
Ponlo allá, es que ya está también.
What? Yes, Joanne?
so the purple part is the part that they share.
The what? I'm sorry?
The purple, the color purple in the
Yes.
that's the part they share.
Yeah, that's what they have in common, you know. And for example, we have part like in here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Let me see.
I can
Like
see
in
your
here,
cursor.
Mark and Matthew have some parts in common, you know. You have Luke,
Oh,
Mark and Luke. Okay.
so in the circle that represents Mark, the 18% and the 10% that's in red in Matthew are common as well between the two.
Yes.
And
Yes. Well, Mark is right there because some scholars believe that Mark was the source, and that Matthew and Luke, they kind of copy from Mark's a lot of things or get the information from Mark. But there's still discussions about it because Luke also brings new things, especially on the childhood of Yeshua that you cannot see on Matthew.
well,
But roughly they share the same topic.
I would
Okay.
actually put down the differences more to the differences in perspective, because as eyewitnesses, and you can talk to policemen and detectives and find out the same thing, everybody sees it from their own vantage point, and they could all be there at the same time, and there will be a core of truth that's common to all of them. But then
Yes.
each one, it's almost like the the story fable of the 5 blind men who were trying to describe an elephant. You know, each one from their own perspective. One had a trunk, one had a tail, one had a leg, you know, and that's all they knew.
Yes, and let me share with you. This is something that I made at school, and there are some topics, you know. Here the topics that they were written, you know, and I will like for us to notice some things in difference with the Gospel of John here that we can it will help us to get to our conclusions. You know, like the topic, the probable date. You see that the John was very late, was about the 80 and 90 was written in Ephesus. The original audience you have here, the Matthew, Jewish mind; Mark, Roman mind; Greek mind; Luke, Greek mind; and John was more universal. The thing that John has is a son of God. Well, they had several kind of themes, general things, the traditional pictures. The portrait of Christos or Yeshua is a gunman. Gunman is good. Um, you see here the perspective. Matthew is more historical, Mark is more historical, Luke is more historical, but John is more theological. And this is important because we'll see that he doesn't get into many details historically. Okay. So the uniqueness of John is 92%. That means he has a lot of different things from the other gospels. Okay, and the chronology and the Passover, there is in John, there is confused because either doesn't specify of show more than one Passover, especially in chapter 2. And this is important too, the geography. The other gospel were more centered in Galilean, and John in the Judea ministry. The discourse, the other gospel, the synoptic gospel were more public, but John was more private. Okay, the other gospels talk about in parables, but John talks more about in allegories.
Allegories.
Okay, the synoptics are more ethical and practical. Okay, and John is more on the person of Yeshua. Okay, and the relationship with other gospels, the synopses are complementary to each other, but the gospel of John is supplementary. When John wrote his gospel, he knows that the other gospel were already in circulation, and that's the reason of its difference. And these are points that will be important for us to know in order to determine or have interpretation of the Last Supper and other things in regards of that week that happens in what we call the Passion Week, what they call the Passion Week. Okay. Now, in regards of that Passion Week, we had different several traditions and several timelines. And don't be scared about all of these things that I'm showing now, but just to show you one example of timelines and everything. So, but what is important with this one is that Yeshua celebrates Passover with his disciple one day earlier than normal. And here's when the problem raises, because and we'll see later in chapter 18 of John, verse 28, that they were the soldiers that were there. It says that they want, well, the officials of the temple, they don't want to be unclean because they want to eat the Passover. That they don't want to be in the case of Yeshua, but Yeshua already have ate. So what happens there? It was a contradiction between John and the other gospels. What's going on there? And that's what we're trying to discuss today. So if that week will be like our Passover, Yeshua will be celebrating on Tuesday evening. Like this week, we celebrate Passover. If that happens in our week and not on Wednesday, and the Jewish people will be celebrated on Wednesday here, Wednesday evening. And then the next Shabbat, okay. And then you will have here the 3 days, 1, 2, 3 days with their 3 nights and 3 days. But today we're not going to discuss about the 3 days and 3 nights, but about the concept of the Last Supper in terms of the question if it was a Passover meal or not. Okay. So we need to keep in mind for now that he was eating the Passover one night before. Okay. But now, was that really a Passover meal? That's our question. Just pause it. It's okay. Let me check something here. Can everybody see me? Can you see me? No? Okay. I need to do something here, guys. I'm sorry.
There you go.
Now you can see me?
Can.
Okay, I have to change the cam because I have a free app in the other cell phone and has an advertising. Free stuff. Okay. So let's continue with this. Now, let's see the account of these events on the Gospels. Okay, the Holy Week, of they call that week of the Passion, okay, and different perspective of all the 4 Gospels. Okay, the preparation for Passover. Okay, Matthew registered that, Mark and Luke, but not John. And Yeshua and his disciples assembled for Pesach, for Passover. All of them registered that. You notice that John, can you see this arrow?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see my arrow moving there? No.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. John doesn't have any, he registered that they were preparing for Pesach in John chapter 13, verse 1. And disciples argue over who is the greatest. Okay. Matthew and Mark don't get into details, only Luke. Yeshua washes disciples' feet. That was registered by John. You see, there's some details in that supper that John registered. It's not that he doesn't mention at all the Last Supper. Yeshua identifies his betrayer. All of them make mentions of that. Now, the Last Supper, in terms of he identifying that, saying like, this is my blood and this is my body, all of them recorded but not the Gospel of John. Okay. Now, the commandment of love, John registered that speak. Yeshua predicts Peter's denial. All of them registered that. Yeshua gives discourse on the upper room. Only John registers that. And the singing of the hymns, the Hallel, when they departed from the room, all the gospel registered that. Luke doesn't register much on that. When they departed from the upper room at the end of the Passover meal or the meal, they sang the Hallel. And John registered that they departed from there, but not registered that they were singing the Hallel. Okay, so you can see that John registers some things, but the other Gospels as well, they don't register everything that happened. So it's a complementary thing, but we can see that John registers some things of that evening, some things that happened that evening. Okay. So what I see here is not that John is not denying the Passover meal, but it is just that it's not his point of interest, and this is important. We cannot make assumptions from silence. The fact that he was not mentioned the details doesn't mean that it didn't happen, or doesn't mean that he didn't know about it, John. But it's just that wasn't his point when he wrote the gospel. Okay. Questions so far? Connections, questions? Joanne?
Well, curious thing, I met a Jewish lady, traditionally Jewish, and in fact, I believe she's maybe even Hasidic. I don't know for sure, but I think she's more conservative than conservative. Honey, they're
Okay.
listening to you fill your cup with ice. Can you not get it out with your hand in a quieter way?
And you met this Jewish lady, and what happened?
Well, during our conversation, which lasted quite a little while, she mentioned having 2 Passovers. And I think maybe, I don't know this for sure because I didn't pursue it, there's one for the family and one for the community.
Yes, that's a Jewish tradition. They always, sometimes they have 2, some communities, they have 2 Passovers. I have attended some of the Jewish and Passovers too. So, and they invite, whoever want to come to the Passover and everything,
I don't know,
And-
she might not be Hasidic, but in any case, she's very religious. And it was
Yeah, Orthodox, because probably it's Orthodox but yes, it's a tradition, they have those 2 Passover meals. They have that tradition. Okay, now let's see some popular arguments. The most popular arguments against the people that say that this is not a Passover meal. Okay, and we're going to get to some conclusions after this and questions. Okay, now the objection number 1, I'm sorry, it says objection, not objections. Number 1, Judah buying stuff. In the book of John chapter 13 says, For some thought, because Judas had the money box, that Yeshua had said to him, buy those things we need for the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. Having received the piece of bread, he then went out immediately. Okay, so the objection goes like, okay, he was buying stuff, and he went out of the table, you know. But it was perfectly right to buy stuff because it wasn't Shabbat. It was the beginning of the 14th day. That means the end of the 13th day. And Shabbat is on the 15th day, according to Leviticus chapter 23, verse 5 and 7. So as we see that they understood the 13th twilight at like the beginning of the 14th day, because the twilight at the end of the 14th will be the beginning of the 15th day. So at that time, in the time of Yeshua, most of the religious people, the Pharisees, they celebrated Passover on the beginning of the 15th day. So in that sense, you will be perfectly right. What do you think?
I agree.
Was that, Donna?
Yes.
Yeah, so it was not that they were celebrating or doing something, you know, they knew that. Okay, let's continue with the objection number.
I have a question. This is
Yes.
Beth Ann. So are you saying, well, when you read that passage, it talks about buying something for the feast, but if they were actually having it, like if they were starting it, what would he be buying? What would he be going to buy would be one question. And then the other is, I guess, would you be saying that he, the people, there would be the marketplace would be open and available for him to buy that, you know, at like twilight on the
we don't know
14th.
what he was buying right there. But if we identify twilight and not as late in the night, but starting, okay, we need to know that at that time in Jerusalem was not like normal days. It was full of people all around, and a lot of people, and the people visiting, and the people preparing everything. You know, they will have these groups called Habura, and the Habura are groups that they got together. You know, when they went to Jerusalem to celebrate, a lot of people that came to Jerusalem, they got together, rent a place, and they celebrate Passover together. So some families and some group will share a larger room with other families, and they would celebrate it together as a group. They call the Habura. And they will have one person leading the Habura, leading the service and everything. So you will have, it's not like somebody says that, no, Judah was there and everything was closed. I don't think so, because it wasn't Shabbat.
Right.
And it was full of people, a lot of people in Jerusalem, buying and moving and celebrating. And it was, you know, all of this crowd there. So the text doesn't specify what exactly he was there to buy, but probably he was, I don't know, to buy, I don't know, something.
Bitter herbs.
Excuse me?
Bitter herbs, horseradish. And since they were all men and not cooking, how about some matzah?
Yeah, I don't know if there was horseradish at that time. I think that's a southern invention.
Okay, well, whatever the bitter herbs.
They're gonna use that to hurt the world.
Maybe with hot peppers.
Yeah, probably. I think they needed something.
That'll make it cry for real.
Yeah, I don't know what, you know. Now, you know, and let's go to the objection number 2.
Hang on, Julio. Donna has a question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I was just going to clarify. You had mentioned that Yeshua celebrated one day early the Passover with his disciples. So most of Jerusalem there and the Jewish people would have been celebrating the next day, which the next day at twilight then started the Shabbat. So he could have been going out to buy things. I don't know if he was eating, if people planned to eat the next day with their families, but the thing there is that if it was one day early, I'm not sure
Yes,
if
it
Beth
was someday
Ann
early.
caught that when you said it before.
Yes, thank you, Donna. I don't know, but it calls my attention that the text says in the first verse, for some thought, because Judah had the money box that Yeshua had said to him. So it's not that they are affirming that Yeshua was telling to him.
Right.
What I think is that he was using that as an excuse
Yeah,
because of the plan that he had, you know?
sure.
And that was, they say, and it was night. That's why probably John was making emphasis, and it was night. So, like, hey, what he was planning, or there's something going on in here. I don't know.
Yeah,
You know?
Judy has a comment on the YouTube stream saying that John 19:31 mentions preparation day. They had to remove the bodies before the Sabbath. And the difficulty with that is that Josephus and other sources from that time also refer to a regular Friday as a preparation day.
Yes. Yeah, it's the same thing, because that was a preparation day for the weekly. Yes.
It's John.
Hi, John.
Hey, John.
Yeah, we don't have a camera, but there's always the preparation day before Shabbat, right?
Right.
So, which preparation day are you talking about?
That's why it's difficult to interpret John's preparation day quote.
Okay, I don't know if I don't have all the information on this stuff, but there is something called the Last Supper, which was practiced by the Galilean Jews and the Samaritan Jews, not practiced by the Judean Jews, in which they would have a Last Supper, in which they would observe a fast from the previous night on preparation day until the actual Passover. And it was the Last Supper before the fast that took place before the regular Passover in Jerusalem. And so that's what they obsessively were practicing. So it's completely reasonable to his disciples that Judas was going out to prepare for the actual Passover on the regular night. Of course, they didn't know Yeshua's plans, that he would be on the cross at the same. He's following the lambs, the schedule of the lambs, and so he would have to be on the cross at 3 or at 9, and then pass away at 3 at the time the lambs were being slain in preparation for Passover. So that scenario fits the timeline perfectly. And I need to find out more about it, but there is a tradition, I forget what it is. It's peculiar to the Galilean Jews and the Samaritan Jews. It was not practiced by the Judean Jews. And that's the information I have. I'll try to get more information on that later, but that's what I understand from the information that I have.
Yeah, we will talk about that a little bit later, because not only was that, it was there were several. We're gonna read some parts of the Mishnah now that talk in a moment that talk about that. Oh, sorry, guys, fixing something here. Yeah. So let's go to the next objection here.
Got a lot of questions.
Yes.
Okay, well, Donna and Linda.
Yeah, Linda.
also
I was
had
seeing
questions.
Linda. I'm sorry, I was not watching the camera. Linda, you have a question?
That's fine. No, I'm learning a lot from y'all. But I was reading in in Matthew, the 17th chapter, on through the, and I was thinking that it was the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when the Last Supper would have been the first day of Passover. Like I say, I'm learning.
Yes. But that word right there, I don't remember the word in there. Let me see if I have it. That word in Greek for first, it also means before.
Oh, really?
Yes. So it's perfectly understandable that they were before the Passover preparing everything, you know. And I'll see. I think I will find it as we go to this.
I'll write that down. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it might be worth just to mention that, tagging off of what John said, you know, a lot of those disciples were Galileans.
Yes. Now, the objection number 2 says that no mention of herbs or lamb and artos or bread, azimos, or matzah. Now, here's the argument. They say, okay, first, there's no mention of herbs or lamb. So that cannot be a Passover Seder because they don't mention herbs or lamb. Also, they use the word artos, which means bread, not matzah, because matzah in Greek is azimos. But that is not right. Because in Luke chapter 24, verse 30 says, now it came to pass as he sat at the table with them that he took bread, artos. And this is in the context of unleavened bread. Okay. Well, some people will say, well, you see, that's why, because he was not celebrating Passover because he was eating normal bread. No, because in Matthew chapter 12, verse 3 and 4, and in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 2, talking about in the context of unleavened bread, uses the word artos, which means bread. Artos only means bread. It doesn't mean matzah or leavened bread. It just means bread. And they use that word indistinguishably. Oh, I say it.
Did a good job.
Okay.
So a little comment on that. Yeah, a little comment on that. Whether it is actual bread or leavened bread, it still fits with this Last Supper concept. They would not necessarily have to have unleavened bread, and not even really a lamb. As a matter of fact, all they would have would be, some kind of bread and wine or something to sop the stuff in. It's just what it is a light supper before the fast.
Well, here's the thing, John. If you think
I'm not finished. Wait a minute, I'm not finished.
Okay.
The fast begins after the light supper on prior to the preparation day. At the beginning of preparation day, it runs through the end of preparation day, which butts up against the actual Passover. So these facts fit very well with that concept of the Last Supper.
So you think that that meeting wasn't a Last Supper? It wasn't a Passover meal?
Let me clarify that. The normal practice of the Galilean Jews and the Samaritan Jews, this is part of Passover. The normal thing is to have the Last Supper and the fast before the Passover. So to the disciples, everything looks normal. This is Passover for them. They know that the real Passover is coming on the Passover day, but this looks normal. This is what they've done for 3 years.
Yeah.
They don't. Yeah. So it's completely understandable that they would understand that if Judah leaves, he's simply going to buy the preparations for the actual Passover the next night.
Yes, I think that they were actually celebrating the Passover on the right date. You know, the Yeshua and the disciples, and we need to meditate on that about as Messianics and to see and why he was celebrating on that date. But here's the text, what I think is a Passover, because Yeshua said so. Luke 22 verse 11 says, then you shall say to the master of the house, the teacher, that means Yeshua, says to you. You know, the context here is that Yeshua sent 2 disciples to separate the house for him to celebrate Passover. He says, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover that expression, eat the Passover, is a lamb. So they did have a lamb. How did they say that there is no mention of a lamb? There is a lamb here. Eat the Passover with my disciples.
Let me ask you this. Maybe there was a lamb. I don't know. It doesn't explicitly, you're saying that it means eating the lamb, but the normal process for the Galilean Jews, Samaritan Jews, is this is the beginning of Passover with this Last Supper. We're going on a fast after the Last Supper for preparation day. Now, whatever they ate there, I don't know. I don't have any information on that, but so that looks normal to the disciples when he says they eat the Passover. In other words, this is the beginning of the Passover for them, the Last Supper, and then they have the actual Passover. That whole process is called Passover for the Galilean and the
yes, but you cannot have Passover, and that is registered in the Mishnah too. You cannot have Passover without lamb, bitter herbs, and matzah. That's
the actual Passover was on the normal night at the end of preparation day.
And grape juice.
Another thing too is we need to have a timeline there so that such that Yeshua is in the grave 3 days and 3 nights.
Yes, I already showed that.
Oh, I must have missed that.
Excuse me?
John's on a roll.
I must have missed that. It's 3 days and 3 nights would mean beginning at on preparation day. The regular Passover on say like on Wednesday evening.
Yes. Yeah. He was celebrating at the twilight of the end. The twilight of the 14th. That means the end of the 13th of Aviv.
Okay, it's like a Passover end of the preparation day.
Yes, I mean at the end of the preparation day. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but that's one of the things that in Yeshua fulfilling these the Passover is that he follows the same schedule as the lambs. That's what the lambs are there for. And what's been
not necessarily, John. He was following.
Of it.
And we will see later that not necessarily. I mean, he doesn't need to be. He was not necessarily. Yeshua was needed to be sacrificed at the same time of all the lambs, because there were a lot there. They were sacrificing. So, somebody has a question, Donna?
Oh, I was just going to say he would have been sacrificed at the same time as the lamb for the temple, not everybody else's lamb, but the lamb for the temple.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but in the temple, they sacrifice several lambs. The Bible says in Deuteronomy that they have animals from the flock and from the herd, I think. So there was a lot of sacrifices there, and they call all of those sacrifices Passover. So
A priest.
let's continue here. So Yeshua called that a Passover. The objection in number 3 says, okay, let me share with you something here. They say, okay, there is no mention of herbs or lamb. We can tell that it was a mention of lamb because that was the actually Passover. Okay. Let me read something to you here. It says, the 2 disciples to make Passover preparation, they will have ritually to clean out the leaven, assuming that all the house that they were going, it was prepared and it was clean and everything. And everything that they did, the passing around of that cup, the words of him interpreting, giving interpretation to the bread that they're eating and the cup they were drinking, those are elements of Passover, because from that time they did that. They did interpret what the Passover means. Whomever was leading the meeting, they would interpret, okay, this bread means, and they would give allegorical interpretation of what they were doing. That is not normal of a normal meal, as some people say. That was a normal meal. No, it wasn't a normal meal. Oh, that was a graduation ceremony for Yeshua and his disciples. Well, you don't. If it was a graduation ceremony, what he says, I would like to drink this cup with you. You only have a graduation ceremony with your disciple once. What he says, I will eat it again. I will drink it again with you. So that means we're going to have another graduation ceremony when I come. So it doesn't make sense. So now when the Bible says that he was dipping, that Judas was dipping something, as some people interpret that as bread, but the Greek word doesn't necessarily, I'm sorry guys, I don't have the Greek word in here, it just comes to my mind. The Greek word doesn't necessarily means bread. It means something, a portion of something that you can dip in something. We can say probably that from there comes the traditional dipping the bitter herbs. I don't know, because nobody knows that in the development of the Agadah, all the elements that have been added. Well, of course, the bitter herbs was not an element that was added. It's a commandment in the book of Exodus chapter 12. But what I mean is the action of dipping the bitter herbs on the salt water. It was probably from this can be an evidence that tradition was practiced from the time of Yeshua. But everything, I have a long text here that I'm not gonna read it to you. It's in a study from Professor Barry G. Smith from Crandall University. I have this study years ago. So it's not like there is no mention of these elements in the Gospels. It's not that they don't have to mention everything in detail, because sometimes for the literary purpose, that wasn't the purpose. They are telling something that happens in general, and the main point was what he was interpreting from there. That was his blood and his flesh. And they don't need to get into details of many things that we would like for us to have today as they wrote the Gospels. Okay, so let's go to the number 3.
Hold on, can I say something?
Yes.
Luke 22:20 says, likewise also the cup after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you. That's obviously a Passover Seder situation.
Yeah, you don't say that in a graduation ceremony. That would be a terrible speech. Okay, so the objection number 3 says they leave the house. You should take the bunch of hyssop and dip it into the blood, and they say, well, they leave the house, and in Passover you should not leave your house, because it's written in Exodus chapter 12 verses 22 says, and you should take a bunch of hyssop, dip in the blood that is in the basin, and strike it into the doorpost with the blood and that is in the basin, and none of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning. You see, and they leave the house as soon as they ate, as they finished. So this wasn't a Passover meal. Exodus 12, and especially this verse, is talking in the context of the Exodus. That means this verse, it was only for the time when they were leaving Egypt. You see, and they do have, a roof. A roof is the distance that is permissible to walk or travel on Shabbat. They do have an eruv, but the Mishnah says that as after the meal is over, the eruv was removed. They then left for the Mount of Olive, and it was permissible after midnight to leave the place where one ate the Passover. And since the meal was now complete, the requirement of staying within the walls of Jerusalem was no longer in effect. So the Mount of Olives was still within the ritual limits or the roof of Jerusalem, within which the pilgrims have to spend the night. So
Julio, what are you saying? What's that word you're using? A roof.
yeah, I'm sorry. Eruv means is the limit that you can travel on Shabbat. That is permissible to move on Shabbat.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. You can see in the major cities where you have a major city Jewish population here in the United States and around the world, outside of the city, they have some signs that says Eruv, 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 like in New York, Los Angeles, and cities like that. They will have, the Jewish people will put signs where the people cannot go out, and that's some mostly this from counting from the central point of the synagogue around the peripheral area of the synagogue. They start counting from there and they establish the eruv. That's on also today. So it's not. So objection number 4, it says no religious people will be there because they don't want to be unclean. And this is the top, what they say. John 18:28 says, then they led Yeshua from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning, but they themselves did not go into the praetorium lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Wait a minute. So if Yeshua already ate the Passover, why these people want to be clean? Well, because they celebrated Passover on different date. That's the point right there, Now, if the Passover already happened, why they want to be clean to the Passover? Because they celebrated a different day. They celebrated on the 15th, and I mean, not to acknowledge that this is a Passover separate is to ignore that 4 times in the Gospel of Matthew, in the Gospel of Mark, and Luke, it called more than 5 times Passover, Passover, Passover all the time. Yeshua himself says, I want to eat the Passover. So it is a celebration. That meal was a Passover celebration.
Julio, one other point. He says, Yeshua says, I want to eat the Passover with you before I suffer. I want to eat the Passover with you before I suffer. I want to eat this meal with you before I suffer.
Yes, because he says, I will not. Yeah. So it's not. Yes, because thank you, John. Because some people interpret says that he had the desire, but he wasn't able to do it. No, he did it. He celebrated and he took the cup. He gave the meaning to that cup, and he took the matzah and he gave the meaning of the matzah. So it was a Passover meal. And it is important to know that, there were different traditions, as John says. Let me share with you this Mishnah Pesachim 4:5 says, where they are accustomed to do work on the 9th of Av, they do where they, I'm sorry? This is what John was saying, the disagreements between the Galileans, you see, Galileans, and the people that live in the area of Judea. This is a discussion in the Mishnah that they have different opinions about working. So it was clear that they have different opinions at that time, and it was okay. Okay. Now, this Mishnah says the Passover, which one slaughter in the morning of the 14th, is under this name. There's another discussion here that some people slaughter the Passover on the 14th, and other people slaughter the Passover on the 15th, or actually on the 13th.
Right, the 13th.
So it was not something weird. Yeshua celebrating Passover one day before. It was normal for them. Okay. So let me share with you something in Deuteronomy in Deuteronomy says, therefore, you shall sacrifice the Passover of the Lord your God from the flock on the herd. Well, let me put you in context. Going against John 18:28 says, then they led Yeshua to the Caiaphas, and then, it says that these religious people, they don't want to be defiled because they want to eat the Passover. Which Passover? This is one point that I want to share I get it from Tim Heck, and he says that based on Deuteronomy chapter 16, it says, therefore you shall sacrifice the Passover to the Lord your God from the flock and the herd in the place where the Lord chooses to put his name. You shall eat non-leavened bread with it. With it. What that it means? The Passover. Wait a minute. They're gonna eat the Passover for 7 days? Because it says you shall eat it with it. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread with it. So they call the sacrifices of the whole week Passover too. So his point here of Tim Heck, he says that what they were doing here, they don't want to be defiled, so they can continue eat the Passover during that week. It can be. It can be an option. So they call it that way. Let me show you another thing here that probably goes along with what John was saying. In Mishnah Pesachim 6, there is something called the Korban Hagiga. Okay. Now everybody knows what the Mishnah is. Hello? No? Okay. Yeah,
Yes,
sometimes it sounds like a rhetorical question, but I'm talking to you guys.
Okay. Yes, I say yes.
Okay. Just in case you don't know, the Mishnah is the comment on of different rabbis, different sages and everything on the Torah. Some of those comments were before Yeshua. Some of those comments comes from the time of Yeshua, and some of those comments comes after Yeshua. So by the time of the 3rd century, about 3rd, 4th century, those comments were put together in a written form, and they called that the compilation of those comments or discussions, the Mishnah. Okay. And later on, other sages start to discuss about what the Mishnah says, discussions over the discussions. And they call that discussion the Gemara. And the Mishnah and the Gemara is put it together in what we know today as the Talmud. Is that clear?
Yeah, but
Okay, that's a rough summary of the Mishnah. So in the Mishnah is divided in books, okay, and tractates. So there is one tractate called Pesachim. Pesachim talks about everything related with Pesach or Passover and the sacrifices and everything. So in Pesachim chapter 6 talks about a festival offering. A festival offering, I put it here in red, the Hebrew. That festival offering is called the Hagiga. Now, the Hagiga was an offering that they can celebrate, they can do before Passover or after Passover. Now, I'm sorry, or during the days of Passover. Now, there is a discussion because this Hagiga is an extra offering, but it's not a commandment directly from God. Okay?
Okay, yes, I'll say yes. Okay, just.
Sorry? Yes, go ahead.
Judy just had an echo. It's okay.
Oh, okay. So the point with this Hagiga sacrifice is that some of the people used to do this Hagiga sacrifice before Pesach, and they will celebrate, do like a Passover meal with this, and it was perfectly okay. Okay, actually, some people will even come to with there were different things at the time of Yeshua. because the Sadducees, some of the Pharisees were not in agreement with the Sadducees. So there is portions that says that they will bring the Passover sacrifice before or after Pesach, and they will call it a shlomi olam, which is a offering of peace. It's not, they will say, well, what are you going to sacrifice this Passover here? It's not the time. They'll say, well, it's not a Passover sacrifice. It's a offering of peace. I say, okay, come and sacrifice it. Okay. But that question is, and the question is still there, that if the Pharisees were not in agreement with the Sadducees, and the Sadducees has the tradition or have the dominion of the temple, how the Pharisees made their sacrifices if they were not in control of the temple? That's a very interesting question. But the point that I want to make here is that in the temple, they will receive sacrifices even one day before Pesach in order to have everything fulfilled, to get celerity, how you say that?
Solidarity.
Yeah, in order to have all the sacrifices. Several people will bring the sacrifice before Pesach one day or even 2 days before Pesach because they don't want to be in a rush. And because the amount of sacrifices, the priests, the Mishnah say that they just accept it. They make blind eye to that in order to give process to all the sacrifices. My point is that they didn't complicate their life as much as we do today with these topics. They just did it, because if we want to have the correct interpretation to say, okay, no, that wasn't a Passover meal because Yeshua needed to die when all the sacrifices were done. If we're going to go into all of those details, then we'll shoot us and study the question why Yeshua dies on Passover and not on Yom Kippur, according to what the book of Hebrews says. The book of Hebrews doesn't describe Passover; it describes Yom Kippur as the clean of the sins and everything.
A high priest.
A high priest, yes. So the point is that it wasn't a big deal about that one day before, one day after Passover at the time of Yeshua. It was perfectly normal to have a meal or have a Passover celebration before and then another one. It was perfectly normal. So, to establish this discussion for me is just, I think it doesn't make sense. Question, Joanna.
Yeah. If it wasn't a big deal, then were they doing their their actual Passover meals over those 3 days? Because from what I understand, it says in scripture that you're not supposed to leave any until morning. You're supposed to burn it up or throw it out.
Right. If you actually go back to what Julio's slide was showing there and actually read through the notes, it actually stipulates.
I can barely hear you.
Sorry, let me turn up a little bit. That better? Yeah. If you look back at the notes that Julio was just showing out of the Mishnah, it actually says that the meals on the 14th and the 15th had to be burned. Whatever was left over.
So a meal on the 13th wouldn't have had to be burned, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So on the 14th and the night following, the 15th, what is left over must be burned.
Okay, I didn't get to read all of that.
They applied the same rules for this Hagiga, to this sacrifice, at the same as it was a sacrifice for Passover. Actually it says here, Korban Pesach.
Yes.
So yeah, my point, I was, okay, but what about if they didn't celebrate it at that time? If Yeshua celebrated at the end of the 13th, why are we celebrating now at the end of the 14th? That means the beginning of the 15th, But when I go to all of these sources and the Mishnah and everything. And I really like the conclusion that Tim Hegg has around this. And he says it wasn't a big deal for that. The important thing is that he was the sacrifice for our sins.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the most important thing, and we should not be making a big deal of this, because some people say, well, the Jewish people today celebrate Passover at the end of the 14th. Why we don't celebrate it at the end of the 13th, as the scripture says? It was perfectly normal at that time to do that. And Yeshua accepted, the Lord accepted Yeshua's sacrifice.
Obviously, or we'd be toast.
Yeah.
So, okay, Julio.
Yes.
John. One other comment. On my comments earlier about the Last Supper, I'm not saying this is the Last Supper of the church, a la Leonardo da Vinci.
Right.
This is this is there's a Hebrew name for it. I don't know. I don't have my material here. There's some kind of Hebrew name for it. It may be this thing that you showed up here with the Pesachim 6. I'm not sure. But I want to make clear that it's not the church's concept of the Last Supper that I'm talking about. I choose those words for it. So I'm not sure how that translates from the Hebrew, but it's something along the lines of Last Supper, the one I was talking about.
Yeah, it's Seudah Mafseket.
Es una Seudat Macheset. Well, they have
Mafseket.
Seudah Matzeket. I didn't remember the second word. It's Seudah, but yeah. Yes.
I don't have a problem with them having a meal on the 13th. I mean, now God set up the 14th as the day for Passover, I believe, from what I've studied. And the 15th would be the first day of unleavened bread, which would be a Sabbath, right?
Yes, but they understood the 14th starts at the end of the 13th.
Exactly. I understand that.
So that's where they celebrated, because and for me it makes perfect sense.
Well,
it was normal for
but
them.
anyway, he had his meal before sundown on the 13th. But anyway.
Well, not necessarily. Well, yes, and again, there are different opinions there, because some people interpret twilight at like 3 p.m. and other people interpret twilight as when the sun goes down and they killed, and they will be eating the Passover later in the night.
I don't think it's as big a deal about when he ate the Passover as the fact that if the 15th is a Sabbath and he died on the 14th, according that he had to be taken down, him and the other guys had to be taken down before the Sabbath came. Everybody knew the 15th was the Sabbath, the first day of unleavened bread. So that was just my issue. He was our Passover sacrifice. He died on the 14th. Whatever time during that day, he died.
Yes.
And some people were telling me, no, he didn't die on the 14th. I said, well, I don't know how that would work if he was our Passover sacrifice.
Yeah, the people had the problem when they tried to locate those 3 days before Sunday. When you try to locate that in the Roman calendar to make it fit with the Sunday, and that's another discussion. The 3 days and 3 nights, like yesterday was the Good Friday was what?
Yeah. But see, Yeshua said that he only gave one sign only, that he was the Messiah. And that one sign was the sign of Jonah. The 3 days and the 3 nights. Right. So that would be the only way that you could go to a Jew and have any kind of argument about it. I would think that Jonah was that and the fact that he filled all the other requirements of the prophets. you know, that
Yes.
told about him.
That is a sign
Hmm.
to the perverse generation.
Okay, I'm
But
perverted.
we have more than one sign.
It's still a
He's-
valid sign, no matter what.
Yeah, he has more than 300 signs.
I know, but that was
know?
the sign he gave the Pharisees or whatever it was.
Yeah, he says, these perverse generations claim for a sign. That's what he
Yeah.
said. That was the sign. That's the sign for them. But I don't need the sign of the 3 days and 3 nights to know that he's Mashiach.
No,
You know?
no, we don't.
No, but like John said, it's still a valid sign.
Yeah. Yes. It's a sign. But what I mean is that he's not the only one.
No.
No.
Because some people we have the tendency to get to the conclusion because Yeshua says these people demand a sign and only one sign will be given to them, to this perverse generation.
Right.
But over and over Yeshua says because they need to be fulfilled according to the scriptures, according to the scriptures,
Right.
according to the scriptures. So it was more than one sign, of course, you see. So that's what I meant that we should not make a big deal that sign was given to the leaders of Jerusalem for them to identify Yeshua as the Mashiach, But of course, we have many signs. And that the topic of the 3 days and 3 nights will be, another interesting discussion where we can go to the details and everything. And it has a lot of things. It is fun. It's fun to have that discussion, And with that discussion, you will need a piece of paper and a pencil and sit down and do the graphics and everything. And it's very interesting. The main point, guys, is that we are in the process. I think as Messianic people or, Torah keepers, whatever you want to call us, that at the beginning we make a big deal and big discussions about this and everything. But it's a question of if we grow as movement, we get maturity, we'll realize that, okay, we can have disagreements of this and it's not a big deal as it wasn't a big deal in the time of Yeshua, So, yes, Linda?
Well, he was arrested the same night after the meal, right?
Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Joanna?
Sorry, guys, if I cannot see all the people at the same time because the screen on my computer is not that big.
That's wonderful.
Joanna's waving at us.
Okay.
Joanne?
Joanne.
Oh, you're muted.
I muted her?
No, she's muted.
Joanna is muted. You're muted, Joanna.
Okay, well, that's only a temporary situation.
Okay.
Okay, might as well play.
What is Torah Talk without you, Joanna?
I don't know. I've never done that. Okay, so another sign of Jonah, or sign within the sign of Jonah, is the crown of thorns, because Scripture says that when Jonah was in the belly of the whale, seaweed actually surrounded his head.
Seaweed?
Seaweed.
Seaweed.
What is that? Seaweed.
That's plants that grow in the sea. Seaweed.
Ah, that's what my wife eats. It's terrible.
That's hilarious. It's hilarious.
Yeah, there were a lot of signs and everything. And then we can start the discussion about the counting of the Omer and everything, because you'll have a lot of friends that they already start counting the Omer and why we do it tomorrow. And, I've been having that discussion with some friend of mine, because all of my friends, they count in the Jewish way. And they say, why are you doing that? I say, well, but, I don't know if it's too crazy for me to say that, but I don't have any problem with that, with the counting of the Omer doing it. Probably for logistic reasons will be better to count it with the Jewish people. But well, we started doing it this way, I think you have more arguments. The argument of the counting of the Omer that I think is more heavy in the side of the Jewish way is just unity, for the fact of unity with the Jewish people. But they can be that can be another Torah talk probably for next Shabbat. If Jeremy can prepare that one, I know you want to do that. No.
Right.
Are you projecting?
And we have do something beautiful in our community to let the people have different opinions without affecting the fact of community, and that's unique. If we and that's something that we do together. If we keep and protect that sense of community together, we're not going to fall into that trap of discussions about doctrinal issues like this, like the name, like the feast, like the calendar and everything. And we can discuss and be open to talk. Shirley is talking.
I think unity is probably the most important thing. I mean, yeah, we can have differences of opinion, but you can't let something come in the community and divide it. You just can't. You got to work it out somehow or another, keep the community together.
Yeah, and mostly when you see that these kind of discussions or topics about, especially the calendar and the dates of or Passover, for example, in the time of Yeshua, it was a normal thing. It was just normal to have those kinds of different ways of practice because the Lord gave us the commandment, but I think He gave us the freedom to choose how we're gonna practice, how we're gonna adjust that commandment to our time that we're living in our times. It's not only the freedom, it's our responsibility to adapt the commandment in the time we're living. The Torah is eternal, but it's the Lord delegate and give that freedom as a precious gift for us to interpret the Torah and to discuss and to wrestle with the interpretation and wrestle with the text, as some rabbi says, in the same way that Jacob wrestled with the angel. Amen. Okay.
Question, Julio.
Yeah.
For Joanna, she made that mention of the seaweed representing the crown. What was that? She's mentioned that there is a scriptural reference to that. What is the scriptural reference?
It's Jonah chapter 2.
Jonah 2. I mean, but how does that relate to Yeshua's crown of thorns? Where's Joanna? Is Joanna there?
Gone.
I'm muted.
Ah.
Muted. I'm muted.
Okay, Joanna.
We need to raise the veto on Joanna.
We can hear you. I didn't mute her.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, he is actually sort of a type of Messiah. After all, he was in the belly of the whale 3 days and 3 nights. He had the seaweed wrapped around his head like a crown of thorns, and in fact, some sects of Judaism kind of wrap something around the horns of the intestines of the goat or the sheep around the horns of the animal when they're roasting the animal, because you definitely don't want those intestines in the animal when you're roasting it. It would mess up everything.
Yeah, klayot in Hebrew.
Okay, well, I just, that's kind of an interpretation, then. It's not really in Scripture per se. It's an interpretation.
Well, Scripture also doesn't say that Joseph is a type of Messiah and blah, 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 and this and that. No, we draw those conclusions ourselves. But we know that Joseph is a type of Messiah and that many things in his life kind of correspond in a way to the life of Messiah.
Okay, well, this is basically a person's interpretation of it. So.
Yeah, the crown thing. Yes, I think is an there are a lot of beautiful interpretations, but we need to be careful to make those interpretations like a dogma or something. Yes, we have the freedom to interpret, and give beautiful interpretations. And sometimes we give interpretations to the Torah to bring one point, to explain one point, and that's permissible. That's a truth. What is not allowed for us to do is to add to the Torah or to take from the Torah. That's what the Torah says. But we can interpret and have interpretations. Okay, guys, it's 2:46. It's time to go and have a nap. And
Pam's already had her nap.
Linda wants to say something.
Okay, everybody, and you have a Shabbat Shalom. Okay.
Shabbat Shalom.
Bye, everybody. Bye,
Bye,
Anthony.
guys.
Bye, Jeremy. Michael, Linda. Bye, everybody.
Later.
Amen.
I have one more question.
Shalom.
More questions? What?
You have a question?
Hold on.
Okay, I'll stop. Question.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay. Wednesday, we observed the Passover.
Yes.
So the Messiah was actually crucified the next day.
Right.
Right?
No,
Right.
the 14th.
Okay.
Biblically speaking,
When was he
the next day.
resurrected? Is it going to be tonight that we observe it, or in the morning?
Sunday.
After sunset.
Sunset tonight.
After sunset tonight.
It'd be
It says early on the 8th day. So that could be any time after sunset.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank y'all.
Tomorrow we'll start the counting of the Omer, the way that we do it at BOB. So tomorrow you can start, or tonight, right there with your family,
Is there something special you do other than just count the Omer you read every day?
Yes, you just pray. You say, Lord, blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, sanctified with your commandments, and commanded us to count the Omer. Today is the day something, or the first week, second week of the Omer. Amen. We can send that to the Facebook page, probably, so that people can do it.
Okay, it's good. That'll be good.
Yeah, my family tradition.
Congregations read Lamentations.
Jeremy, what'd you say?
My family's tradition, we actually have a little sheet that has 49 boxes on it, and each one has a different scripture reading for the day. So we do the blessing that Julio did, and then we read that scripture reading, and the kids actually draw like a little sheaf of wheat.
Oh, wow.
That's so
I can post that as a document.
Yeah, that's like an idea. I can copy that.
I'd like to draw a little thing of wheat.
Yeah. So yeah, and I have there's something that I take from Christian theology that I like. Since we start counting the Omer tomorrow, and it's first fruits of resurrection. So I do a breakfast with my wife, and we just have a nice breakfast and pray and give thanks, because Paul says that if Yeshua didn't resurrect, our faith is vain. So it's a beautiful thing to give thanks for the resurrection.
Yes.
Amen.
So
safe.
Bye, guys. Okay, you have a good Shabbat. Amen. Bye-bye.